Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2015 Spanish Day celebration. As you know, every year we celebrate Spanish Day on September 15, and for this year we have selected a very unique group of panelists, right? None of the panelists is a native speaker of Spanish, which I think is fabulous, all right? So this year's theme is Diverse Perspectives of Spanish, a panel of non-native speakers, and we are going to have speakers who are graduate students, undergraduate students, as well as high school students. And I'm very glad that we've got such a great selection of speakers for our event.
So for today, I will be focusing on the Spanish past tense, the preterite and the imperfect, and bringing my perspective on the process that I had to go through to understand that perspective and how difficult it was for me as a non-native speaker to understand the past and past tense in Spanish. And so I'm just going to give a little background, academic background, and talk about the literature review that has been done on the Spanish past tense. And then I will talk about different challenges that I had being a non-native speaker. And then I'll talk about how I overcame that as a non-native speaker and my advice to those who are studying Spanish in the audience. So the literature review done by a couple authors, one of whom is our moderator, Dr. Pratt, who worked with other professors as well, or students, did some research and realized that the Spanish past tense is very difficult because in English it's a little bit different. Without getting too academic, in a nutshell, the Spanish past tense has two modes, and in English it's not the same way. And so, how many of us in here have learned Spanish? Or is in the process of learning Spanish? Okay, so you guys know what I mean when I talk about the imperfect and the perfect, correct? Okay, so generally speaking, when we were taught in school that one is to talk about an action that was completed in the past, and one is to talk about an action that was completed in the past but still continues. And those are the general rules that we learn, basically. And a lot of times, the reason why it becomes more complex is because the textbooks add more rules that makes the whole process more complicated. And so you have textbooks that say the imperfect is used to talk about one's age, or it's used to talk about the background of a story. So if I say, for example, once upon a time, there was a little young girl who walked in the woods, and she met a stranger. Just that alone, once upon a time, the background is what textbooks say is the imperfect. And she was kidnapped in the woods, is what they say is the preterite. I've confused you so far, right? So that's the confusion I had as well. Because in English, we don't say it like that. So you can imagine my frustration having to be in a classroom and the teacher says, you have the typical paragraph with a bunch of empty spaces, and the teacher says to choose quería or quise. And you try to figure out how does it work, because in English we say, I wanted to go to the movies. So in Spanish, I'm saying, is it quería ir a la película o quise? It's just confusing. Or if I say, for example, when I was a child, we went to Disneyland. Does that mean that as a child we went to Disneyland one time? Or does it mean when I was a child we went to Disneyland every summer? So it was very, very confusing. And what even makes it worse is that textbooks tell us to make it easier for English speakers is to think about was/were. So if in English you say was, then in Spanish it's the preterite. But if you say were, it's going to be perfect. It was just a mess. And so I struggled with that for a very, very, very long time. And I struggled with that more so because my teachers taught in English. They were not native Spanish speakers. And so all through undergrad, I had this confusing experience. When I did my master's degree, I had the same experience. And my teachers would constantly tell me, you need to revise the preterite and be perfect. And I couldn't, not disagree with them. So I went ahead as a master's student and took classes in the summer here at Texas Tech, just so that I can understand the imperfect and the preterite again. Well, that confusion started again because then they added more rules. So I just gave up. Last semester, I took a class with one of my professors, and it became a little bit more clear to me. And so the analogy that she used was to think of the microwave oven. Most of us who are top chefs in the kitchen would know what a microwave oven is, and to use a crock pot as a metaphor. And the idea is that when you're in the kitchen and you're using a microwave, your focus at that point is starting and stopping, if that makes sense. Or it's your purpose. What's your purpose for using the microwave? Now, I hope I got that right. That's the way I understand it. When you use the crock pot, you start cooking in the kitchen, you leave it on for a few hours, you come back, you go shopping, you go to sleep, and you come back for your food. That's the imperfect. And so that made it a bit more clearer for me. And so it's not about an action, an incomplete action, as some textbooks would say, or an imperfect action because it's incomplete and still continues in the present. And it's not about stopping, like the example what I gave, the girl being kidnapped in the woods. It's about the focus of the speaker or the focus of the author. And that gave me a lot more perspective. And another thing that helped me was I started reading little kids' books. As crazy as it sounds, I started reading, I went on Amazon and bought little books like Cinderella or Robin Hood, or recently I went to Spain and bought some books as well. And the concept of the microwave and the crock pot helped to sink it in. And it gave me a greater perspective. Now, I'm not there altogether, I admit. But compared to the confusing state that I was in for about 5 to 6 years, it finally made sense to me. And so a study was done with a group of students. A control group was done and an experimental group. And they were given a package to test their understanding using this example as a crock pot and oven. And the study showed that those who got the metaphor of the crock pot and the microwave oven did a lot better. And so the implication is that we don't want to confuse you guys anymore. We want to make it very simple. And so for me, that was one of the greatest things I struggle with, even a lot more than the subjunctive, just because you have to think about it in your head. Yesterday, I went to the park. Or when I was a child, I went to the beach. And so I convert that in my head, but I get into trouble when I try to do it in Spanish. So this example taught me to focus on the context and the focus of the speaker or the author. And I would hope that this would shed some light on those of you who are currently learning Spanish or in the process of learning Spanish. And we can talk about it, we can chit-chat about it. It becomes easier, you have to practice. I tutor as well, and so tutoring helps reinforce the concept, and you want to make sure you get it right so that when you're tutoring a student, you tell them the right thing. And so that's my topic for today. Thank you very much.
A little bit of background about me. Like she said, my name is Spencer Key. I have been learning Spanish since 2008. I started teaching Spanish in 2010. And that was the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. Because I'd only been learning Spanish for 2 years. I came to Texas Tech for my master's, not having any experience in Spanish except studying abroad in Spain for a semester. And then I came here, and one of the TAs quit, and they needed another teacher, and they said, oh, well, Spencer can do it. Yeah, let's stick her in the classroom. So I started teaching first level Spanish students, 1507. I don't know if any of you are in class here at Tech, but 1507 is a review class for high school students who have had 2 years of Spanish already. So they were already ahead of me. My experience since then has been a lot broader. I've had many more classes. I am in my PhD program working on my dissertation right now about how to teach Spanish. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you guys about is my experience teaching the language. When I go in and I say, I'm a Spanish teacher. Sorry. Whenever I go and tell people, I'm a Spanish teacher, they say, do you speak Spanish? Yeah, I do. I'm white and I speak Spanish. It's amazing. Then if the person speaks Spanish, they'll start speaking to me in Spanish, and then they'll tell me, you speak Spanish so well. And I just want to say, well, I sure hope so. I'm a Spanish teacher. But I understand the perspective. A lot of the times, non-native speakers don't have the accent perfect, or they're seen as not knowing as much about the language, which can be true. But I think that we have to consider the study that someone has put into something. So what I prepared for you guys are a couple of studies that were done comparing non-native teachers to native teachers. So one study done in, not 200, done in 2000, said that the main differences between your teachers are they're going to have different levels of competence, especially in pronunciation, which who's more likely to have good pronunciation? Just call it out. Native speakers, right? What about grammar knowledge? Non-native, probably. Unless you have studied it as a native speaker, if you've studied the grammar, you're probably fine. But if you haven't, you just have what you grew up with. Okay? Differing in terms of teaching behaviors. Yes?
Is that not typical for, say, growing up in Central America or in Spain to study it for grammar like we do for English?
Well, can you teach English grammar though?
No, but I'd say I have for a fair grasp on it.
Right. So you understand it and you can use it, but the idea of being able to teach it is different. That's the main difference between the teaching styles you're going to find. That's exactly the point. You're going to have that understanding, but say, oh, why is it that way? Why is it the preterite or the imperfect? Because that's the way we said it whenever I was 5. Okay, and the teaching behavior also changes because of that, but both can be equally qualified according to this study. I tend to agree. According to ACTFL, which is the definitive group for Spanish and language learning, and all teachers should at least have advanced low language proficiency, which is a very big deal. You have to be able to speak fluently, discuss pretty much anything on a high level. And non-natives and natives can both do that. It just depends on the work that you put into it. Now, drawbacks of being a non-native speaker. First of all, that reaction, right? You're my Spanish teacher? I actually think that Dr. Pratt here has had a student walk out of her class because she didn't look like she spoke Spanish. 3? Okay. She didn't look like a Spanish teacher, so they left and dropped her class. Even though she's fluent in 6 languages. So that's a big drawback that you can have. Another thing is that you'll just have people challenge you a lot. You'll have people say, oh, well, I thought it was this way, or my grandma says it this way. Or even the non-natives will say, no, you're not going to be able to teach me Spanish. I need a native teacher to teach me. But it can go both ways. One of the things that I think is difficult is when they say, oh, how do you say this? And sometimes I just don't have the answer. But I tend to tell them, not a dictionary. Let's figure it out together. And you can go from there as a teacher. A lot of times non-natives are more likely to have gaps in their cultural knowledge because you just didn't grow up in it. I have not had 26 years of experience with Spanish. I've had 6. So it's a little bit different for me as opposed to a native speaker. And one of the studies that I read was Horowitz, 1992, 93, and 96. And each of those studies said that non-native teachers have a lot of anxiety about how effective they're going to be. So that's kind of like working against the teachers as well. Am I going to be able to teach these kids enough to be effective? The good thing is there are benefits to being a non-native speaker as well. One of the benefits that I've seen is people come into my class and say, oh, thank goodness, someone who learned Spanish and they speak fine, so maybe I can learn Spanish too. Like, put people at ease a little bit, okay? I've also noticed that I understand the dilemmas a lot better. I understand what a student is where a student's coming from when they don't understand a certain grammar concept. If Gail doesn't understand the preterite and the imperfect, I know exactly why, because I went through that same problem, and I can explain that to her. A native speaker might not know what the issue is unless they've specifically studied that. Okay. Oh, it's also, sorry, I'm looking at my notes on here because they won't show up here. It's really helpful when it comes to explicit grammar knowledge. Like I already said, there are a lot of studies that say that non-natives have a better grasp of explaining the grammar. And I found it really helpful, even though I don't like teaching grammar. I found it really helpful when it comes to the final exams of my students that they're required to take grammar tests. So I'm able to prepare them better for those, even though I'm not a big fan of teaching grammar step by step, because native speakers don't learn it that way. I don't think that we need to go step by step. Okay? And some people also have said in a couple of studies that your accent can be perceived as being more easily understandable as a non-native speaker. So that's kind of a preference thing. It depends on the students. So, Madrid 2004, a study showed preferences versus results. You have students preferring native teachers whenever you get to the higher levels, whenever you have your minors, Spanish minors, you have your Spanish majors, you have people wanting native teachers in their classroom because they either have a perception that says that the native teachers know what it's all about, they're going to be able to teach them more, or they just want to be able to have a different interaction with the teacher once they keep moving up. The study also said that teachers value the non-native presence from the primary education stage. And I put why on both of these because I wanted to see what you guys had to say about that. Why do you think that teachers would want non-natives with your elementary kids and students would want natives with the upper level ones? Go for it.
It's less intimidating when they're non-native, I think.
Okay.
Have
you had both?
Yeah. For me, like, I guess it's different because, like, I understand a native more because my mom's, like, fully Dominican. But I think for others, I think maybe it's just, like, you have that understanding and that bond at first because, you know, if you don't have that at first, they might get scared away.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, that's a good point. Anybody else?
Have you had students that prefer to have native speakers when they're younger?
I don't have as much experience with younger students, and this study didn't really discuss anything except the teacher's perspective, not the student perspective when they're little, because it's kind of hard to evaluate how a third grader feels about native versus non-native. I did notice whenever I started teaching that I had to change my accent. Because I learned Spanish in Spain, and so I would say, "Hasta and people say, "What? What'd you say to me?" "Hasta luego." So I've lost my accent because I've had to adjust to students being able to understand me. So I know what you're talking about exactly. All right. Well, the last part of the study said, "Oh, yes."
Increasing difficulty because, one, if you're non-native yourself, or if you don't grow up listening to it, the fact that that person is not native, and let's say you're a heritage learner, could mean there's less intimidation there. But as you increase in your knowledge, then you want the real, quote, real stuff. That is not to say that a non-native can't know it at that level, but I don't know.
Much less likely.
Yeah, much less likely, because then you've got, your idiomatic phrases that go beyond just the few that they teach you, at first. But, I know even me, I would prefer, but I would also, the higher up I go and the deeper I want to learn, the more I want to also know that that native speaker also speaks my language, so we can communicate across those
The issues that you're having.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that for lower levels, it's better to have a non-native teacher because they know more of the grammar. And then for instance classes like cultures and literature, I prefer native speakers as my teachers because they grew up saying it and I mean talking about it, and then they understand the real background, not from an audience perspective.
They lived it.
Yeah.
No, it's fine.
So you're talking about culture, not literature.
I prefer culture and literature to be a native speaker.
Because the literature is not necessarily
True.
the kids.
Yeah, but I prefer grammar.
But it is correct. Literature is culture.
It is culture, yes. The culture, they normally, and they have some examples, like grandma and
They have
things like
the
that.
stories.
Yes, they have some nice stories, yes.
Well, I'm here to tell you, this is the last thing I'm going to say. This study, along with almost every single study that I've read, said that there's no difference in what you're going to be able to learn. It just depends on how far the teacher is willing to go and how much you're willing to study too. So I thought that was really interesting. And that's all for me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Key. Something for us to be thinking about, isn't it? She's really raised some issues that we could be thinking about further. And as we go through the year, we can always pick some of these topics that we are talking about and, blow them up into tertulias and things like that, and talk more about them, okay?
Say immersion for fluency. More simple. And my talk will be very informal despite of this really sophisticated title. So, and I guess what I will be talking about will sound as a truism, really. It has been widely accepted now that immersion is important for language acquisition. So I will just remind you about main theories, some ideas, and we'll just mention some research findings that support this idea. And specifically, I will talk about immersion and classroom learning. I will address the notion of fluency. And finally, I will conclude my talk with my own experience of immersion as a second language learner. Do I talk too fast or? So, immersion. For the purposes of this talk, which is kind of informal, I will use the term immersion as an umbrella for any real-life experience in a target language and culture. And of course, in linguistics and second language pedagogy, the term immersion means a lot more. We know about immersion as the use of the target language as a means to study content subjects, like immersion classroom, and bilingual immersion programs. In these cases, immersion is understood as a domestic educational practice. And there is a vast amount of research done on second language learning in which immersion is distinguished from the study abroad. A lot of this research has been done in Canada on studying French. However, in my talk, immersion includes the study abroad context and is understood as being in opposition to the traditional classroom experience. So I distinguish immersion as a real-life engagement with culture and language and classroom experience. So, quite simplistic, but still. On one hand, traditional classroom teaching is linear, it is predicted, classroom activities are artificial, and even those that are considered very close to the reality, like skits and simulations, are still very much artificial. On the other hand, immersion is about walking in the street, interacting with people in different situations, on the bus, in the restaurant, living with a host family, if you're studying abroad, so on. It's about navigating through real-life situations, and they are unplanned and require that you respond right away. Although classroom learning provides a great deal of security and can give a lot of knowledge, it is an experience of immersion that actually corresponds to the way natural learning works. Both are random and convoluted, according to Harmer, 2007. This takes us to the old and now classical distinction made by Stephen Krashen back in the 80s. There is learning and there is acquisition. So this sharp distinction has been under criticism at times, but it is an important part of the L2 teaching theories and practices. Just to remind you, for Krashen, learning is about grammar and rules, and acquisition is about the actual language use. Learning is explicit conscious. It helps to speak accurately, but it slows you down considerably. Acquisition, on the other hand, is implicit or unconscious, and is about spontaneous language use, which is fast but not necessarily accurate. Krashen's learning leads to building up a grammar knowledge of a language, but not to having skills of actual language use. Only acquisition does that. As we can see, traditional classroom is heavy on the learning part, while immersion is about the process of acquisition. So fluency. In the professional language of the research, fluency can mean different things and can be measured also in different ways. The simplest way would be to define it as an amount of words spoken per minute. Fluency can be opposed to accuracy and is often associated with the language proficiency. But today I'm using this term in a very informal way. I'm following Lennon, 1990, who defined fluency as the highest point on the scale that measures spoken command of a foreign language. Very broad definition. Which includes not only the speed of speaking, but also many other things. Listening comprehension and the appropriateness of the responses that you give. Understanding not only the straightforward messages like, it's 3 o'clock p.m., but also the messages that are implied. Like, for example, the phrase, it's 3 o'clock p.m. in Spain might mean that there is no point to go shopping because the stores are closed for siesta. And this cultural knowledge comes through experience of living in a country and making one's way in a culture. So now I'll talk a little bit about my experience. Many years ago, I studied Spanish faithfully in classroom setting in Russia. I started studying Spanish at 14 on my own, which wasn't very productive because there were no courses offered, no study materials available in my hometown in Kyrgyzstan, if you know where it is. So by the time I was 18 and entering the university in St. Petersburg, Russia, I still was on the beginner level. So then I studied Spanish for 5 years in classroom, graduated from the university, knew well Spanish grammar, the history of Spanish language. I studied Spanish literature from the beginning to the contemporary period. I read a lot of books and articles on culture and history of Spain. I read poetry and prose in the original, but I wasn't a fluent speaker at all. What helped me was my brief staying in Spain, just 4 weeks, visiting my friends in Catalonia. First, it was a multiple shock. Linguistic, cultural, and climatic. about the climate. I flew out from Moscow at the end of December. You can imagine Moscow in the winter, a lot of snow, very cold and windy. I was wearing a heavy coat and a fur hat, gloves, scarf, everything. Now, I arrive in Barcelona, and what I see are the palm trees right in the airport building. A lot of sun, blue sky. My friends picked me up and took to their house, and on the way, I couldn't believe I was seeing it in the real life. It was like dream-like sensation. More palm trees, lemon trees full of lemons, tangerine trees just to decorate the streets in the city. I was on my first travel abroad ever, and my head was spinning. For a couple of days, I couldn't take in so much of Spanish that I was hearing around me. But after a while, it became normal. I realized I could understand quite well what was told to me. I became brave and started walking around the town by myself and asking questions in the streets. And I would get answers and understand them gradually. People seemed to be pleased talking with me. It was especially nice because I was talking to them in their second language. It was in Catalonia, where the Catalan is spoken on the daily basis. My friends, a married couple, spoke to me in Castilian Spanish, Español. But I really liked the sound of the Catalan, and even started picking up a little bit of it by the end of my staying with them. I participated in the celebrations of the end of the year, which are mostly family celebrations, La Navidad, Christmas, Reyes Magos, the day of the three wise men, got together the extended family, and the New Year's is a quieter holiday, mostly spent in front of the TV and always with traditional 12 grapes on a saucer. And I'm remembering all those moments as a cherished part of my memories and life experiences. I can say that all years I spent at the university employing my brain to learn Spanish. They were important, of course, but that human experience that I had in Spain for just 4 weeks, surrounded by friends and their family, were extremely powerful in bringing all my knowledge together and in making it work in real life. I stopped thinking about getting my sentences perfectly correct. I just tried to understand people and make myself understood when I was there. And a miracle happened. It was like magic. All the pieces of the puzzle fell right in their places in terms of everyday communication. I was speaking without hesitation, without feeling unsure whether I sound cultured or knowledgeable. It was fine. Young people. Study well at home, but then go abroad, plunge into the everyday life, don't worry about making errors, and enjoy the culture, make new friends, take lots of pictures, and bring back your stories. And when you speak Spanish with your teachers about your trip, you will be surprised how fluent you became thanks to all those experiences, and thanks to the immersion. That's it.
Okay, so just a bit of my academic background in Spanish. I started learning Spanish about 7th or 8th grade in middle school, but when I got to Lubbock High and started really hitting it hard, it wasn't until about the 11th grade. I always knew that I needed to be bilingual because that's important in this area. But about 11th grade, I really fell in love with the language, and part of that was the grammar. It's kind of fun and different, but that's really influenced me in where I'm going now, and eventually might want to teach it in a college level, but we'll see. But the subjunctive is one of those things that when you're learning the grammar, you just kind of, the students, and as I've seen fellow classmates do this, and it's like, present tense, okay, I got that. Preterite, imperfect, okay, we're still kind of iffy about it, but that's fine. We can kind of get through it, and we'll just kind of just throw the past tense, and we'll just use whatever we want. But, well, when we start getting into the subjunctive, it's like, okay, I kind of get the conjugations, but I have no idea how to use it, and you've just lost me, and I may never want to do this again. So, and then once you get to the point, and then once you get the present tense down, then you have to sit there and like, oh yeah, by the way, there's a past subjunctive, and they got 2 different forms for that, so choose one, and we're going to keep going. So, it's one of those weird little things on grammar, and one of the hardest things about it is there is no good equivalent in English for it that I've found. It kind of exists, and it used to be used in English, I think, but we've lost it, and so whenever we say it, we always use the infinitive form. So like, I want you to go to the store. In Spanish, it's quiero que vayas a la tienda. But if we were to literally translate it, it's I want that you go to the store, and we just don't do that. So it's just really weird, and it's a lot of fun once you get it down, and it really helps get the complicated messages across, but getting it down is really hard. And early on, like, you feel like you're near proficient in the language or something, and like you got the present tense down, you're using it almost fluently, but then you have to sit there or I had to sit there and go like, okay, so the present tense is this, and I got that, and then you get to the que part, the switch, and then wait, what's the tener in the present, or in the yo form of the subjunctive? Oh wait, that's tenga. Okay, now I'm good. So, and then, yeah, so that was my experience, and it's just one of those weird little things. And then, when to use it and when not to use it. You get there, and it's like, you got all these rules, and you have to kind of figure it out. So originally it was like, okay, yeah, I want to do something, kind of something that is a wish, or something that might not happen or may happen. Yeah, that's great. But you have to change the subject too, and that was one of the hardest things for me to get. It was like, oh, quiero que yo tenga. No, that's quiero tener. I want to have. It was just really difficult, but I eventually got that down. But there's also always exceptions to the rules. So I found out that also, if you doubt something, apparently you still leave that in the subjunctive, and it's just there's rules upon rules and upon rules, and then and then they get broken. So usually with grammar, what my rule of thumb is, kind of like the Pirates of the Caribbean in almost every senses. It's more of guidelines than actual rules. And that's the easiest way, because everything gets broken. The subjunctive is no different. But once you get it down and you start to get to use it really well, and you really get to get complicated messages across about wants and feelings and stuff that you can't easily get. While I was in Spain and while I've been here too, I've also noticed that native speakers sometimes have much more difficult problems really getting how that's working. They just do it with no problem. But the non-native speaker or learners, okay, we have to learn this because that's the way it works, and so we have these rules to encapsulate it, but it just doesn't work with native speakers. So, yeah, it's just a lot of fun, and it's really, the complexity of it really helps to get my points across to native speakers. It helps get everything that I want to say across. We don't have to hide behind these little boundaries because my Spanish isn't exactly good enough, but I can get thoughts about arguing or about various things, about it's a possibility that it's rare that something is going to happen. Yeah, it's just really complicated and really a real issue. So it was really short, but that's the subjunctive.
All right, so now we are going to listen to Sebastian Sherpa. Sebastian is a junior at Lubbock High School. And for the past 2 years, I should say, we've been fortunate to have a lot of collaboration with Lubbock High School. And we are very impressed by the contributions they bring us. So today we are very, very happy to have you here, Sebastian, to talk to us about learning Spanish for survival. All right, good.
Hi, I'm Sebastian. I started here in Lubbock in middle school. I wasn't the best student in middle school, obviously. I only spoke Spanish. 3, think about it. it's an interesting language, I have to say. There's a lot of benefits of learning this language. It's important to have to know it, as I'm sure many people in here know. According to Pew Research Center from data collected in 2013, there are over 41 million native speakers in the US alone, and an additional 11 point something million that speaks Spanish as a second language in their home. Approximately 13.5% of the population, of the total population of the US, speaks Spanish in their home. That means that the US is second only to Mexico itself in Spanish speakers. Mexico has 121 million and the US has 52 million at the moment, a growing number, as I'm sure many are aware. For many people in the US, Spanish is natural to them. It's what they grew up speaking in the house. And these people are called heritage learners. They are the ones that learn Spanish because it was their parents' language. They are the ones that came from families that spoke Spanish, so it may not have been their parents' language per se, but say they came from Mexico. And so they felt that because it was in their lineage, they had to speak the language. I am, quite obviously, not a heritage learner. So I had other motivations or other reasons for learning this language. There are two main ones, and they're also terms used within the academic debacle that you all have going here. It is the two are instrumental and integrative motivational reasons. I ascribe to both. I have my instrumental reasons at being that it's probably really smart to learn the language, especially being that I live in Texas, or really any other border state would be very useful to know it. And it's one of the fastest growing languages, so it's useful, It's not very many people would think that this language, especially in like Middle America, Nebraska, South Dakota, people there wouldn't think that Spanish is as powerful as it is. I'm also an integrative learner, which means that I have personal or cultural reasons for learning this language. I've usually lived in pretty good neighborhoods. I didn't really think about any parts of towns or whatnot that I was not part of, so I didn't think about those people or their languages until I got to a place in my life, middle school, where I started seeing the benefits of it personally. I had a great Spanish influence where I was living, like my neighborhood or people in my family, or I had great Spanish influence in my friends or with their families. And a lot of their families didn't speak English. Well, if they did, it was very, very butchered English. It was hard to understand their English. So I had also this reason. It was very useful to learn the language, so I could talk with maybe their aunt or their uncle when I was over with them. With these reasons, I also have figured it would be good to learn as I went out into the world. In Texas, or as I have little experience elsewhere, obviously, specifically in Lubbock, Spanish is a very integrated language into this city. There are plenty of spaces that are Spanish oriented with people from Mexico or from Spain. There's also benefits in the workforce, obviously. As many of you are aware, it's a great benefit to be bilingual. Many jobs seek it out. And at home, we don't really have cable or satellite. We have bunny ears, which some people know of. Yeah, some people know, some don't. But what this means is really the only channels we get are public access, the evangelical channels, and Spanish language channels. We get about 3 or 4 of those. But during the World Cup over the summer, that's the only thing we could watch on the Spanish language channels, Univision. And it aided me greatly to know this language, because otherwise I would only be able to follow the game. I wouldn't be able to follow the commentary, anything about the players, which is useful. It's not useful, but it's entertaining more so than just watching, a language you don't understand. A lot of people also don't pay for cable or satellite for financial restraints, college kids, or for moral reasonings, being that they don't want to shell out large sums of money for very, very inexpensive entertainment. According to Pew Research, oftentimes these Spanish-speaking networks, the ones on cable and off cable, get better ratings than their English-speaking counterparts. I think it was 2011. Univision got better ratings than even Fox and NBC, which I found interesting in the U.S. As I said before, I didn't really think about the language growing up. Like before I moved to Lubbock, I only really thought about it once I was given the option to think about it, as in someone suggested that I should probably take the class, and I thought, why not? What's it going to do any harm? And then I started liking the language. I started seeing it around me more so than I had before. I started being able to pick up on things when I went out with my friends or just with my family. And as I went out, as I aged and I went out more, I started seeing it in restaurants. Like I'd go to a restaurant, I'd be able to actually talk to people other than just the people at my table, because obviously not all of the places I went were English speaking, because I don't always like burgers and fries. Very few people do. So I'd go to these places, these Mexican or these Spanish-speaking places, and I'd actually be able to converse with the waiters or with people around me. And oftentimes I'd get looks of surprise, or even people talking about their surprise that I could talk to them, even in the most basic of manners. And this practice, this informal practice, did greatly influence me, and probably will continue to as I age in the classroom and out of the classroom, moving into the workforce.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. You were cracking us up when you were talking about aging. Sebastian, do you remember the question I asked you last week? Was it Friday? Yes. Do you remember the question I asked you?
You asked me a lot of questions.
Do you mind if I share the one about age?
Oh, of course.
So I asked Sebastian, I said, Sebastian, are you finally 17? He said, oh, I'll be turning 16 in October. So we have a 15-year-old speaking to us like this. This is just wonderful. This is what we are trying to do with the schools, to give us access to these, young people to be talking to us like this. And I hope that, the older people here, we've learned a lot from Sebastian. I mean, this is just so impressive. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Stephanie Terrigan, and I'm a senior at Lubbock High School, and this is my 6th year learning Spanish. And that doesn't mean that I'm fluent or anything. It means that I can pronounce all of the food in the Taco Bell menu correctly. Instead of burrito, I can say burrito, and then instead of saying tortilla or whatever y'all people say, I don't know. And then I'm gonna apologize in the beginning happening because like I'm only racist to my race when I say white people because like I don't want to say the citizen of the United States. That's too long, so I'm just gonna call white people. Like, come on, I do this. So okay. And Spanish is my fourth language, and because of it, it is not my last. I told my Spanish teacher, Miss Earl, she's sitting right there in the middle, that the reason why I took Spanish, I'm taking Spanish, was that I wanted to be able to talk to more people. Like, I love talking to people, if y'all can tell. And I wanted to spread the gospel around the world. So, in order to accomplish that, I had to speak, write, and have fun. That's what the teachers call it. Like, they have these games, these lame games, you know, just like, have fun in Spanish. Okay, so, first, what I learned was speak, even if you don't want to. According to Time magazine, one of the secrets to being successful in language learning is to force yourself to engage into speaking the language. I don't know about y'all, but like I'm a bit self-conscious when like speaking in front of people. Even right now, I'm just like, am I talking in English? And like, especially in a foreign language. For me, English is a foreign language. So like, another foreign language is Spanish. Just like talking in front of people in Spanish, it's like terrifying. But in order for me to conquer that fear, Jesus. Like I think Jesus is like a Hispanic man. That's in my head. Like he sent something more fearful than public speaking. He sent me a strict white woman to be my Spanish teacher. And you can tell it's that one. And this teacher had a game. She called it a game, but we call it like torture. The game was simple. It was basically you have to speak Spanish for the whole period, every single day, for 6 months. And one period is 50 minutes, but it felt like 5 hours. Like, y'all imagine this times 5. And then there are penalties, of course. And we had, so the penalties were cruel, well, at least for me. It was like, if you don't speak Spanish, so she gives you these 2 little plastic chips, and then each of us has like 2, and then if you don't speak Spanish, if you say something to your friend like, hey, did you hear about this person? She'll like look at you in the eye, and just like that evil eye, and just like, what did you say? And then she'll like come to your desk and like get your chips, and those chips worth points, extra credit points. And in her class, extra credit is like, it's heaven. It's like basically giving you money. It's really rare. And so because I was an overachiever, or I guess Asian, I didn't want those extra credits to, yeah, I can be racist in my own race. Like, I didn't want those extra credits to go away. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to pass this class to get a higher GPA. Level high problems. And like, yeah, GPA level high is, that's a dirty game. So, all year long, I forced myself to speak in my broken Spanish. I was like, holla, teacher, like, me llamo Stephanie. That was basically my Spanish. And then, like, eventually, I became comfortable at making mistakes, and eventually, I learned Spanish a lot more. Okay. And then, 2, write like your life depends on it. According to an article by James Smith, writing practice is the ultimate way to really learn a new vocabulary and practice verb construction. And I am a living testimony of that because last year I wrote more essays in my Spanish class, this is my AP Spanish class, than my AP English class, which is like ridiculous. I knew that the curriculum didn't require us to write that much. But some teacher just, I don't know, get excited. And then, but after writing endless essays in her class, and going on wordreference.com, because Google Translate is not dependable, wordreference.com, you'll go there. And because she didn't want mediocre essays. She said, like, I'm not going to accept that, like, simple vocabulary, so I was like, fine. So then I went to wordreference.com. And I had a better understanding of the language structure, and my vocabulary just drastically increased because of her. Thanks to my strict white Spanish teacher, because I wrote more essays in her class than my AP English class, I passed my AP Spanish test, but not my AP English test. So that's kind of like a, I don't know. That goes weird. Okay, and then lastly, this is, I don't know. Y'all know like your Spanish high school teachers, they tell you oh, just have fun and play these games, That's just wrong. According to a dissertation by Claudia Smith, one of the basic principles for language acquisition states that the language student must have a low level of anxiety in order for the message to be acquired naturally. So, those teachers who told you that you have to have fun to learn, they're not wrong. And what I did for myself was I made flashcards, and it's basically my own grammar handbook that I've made since freshman year, and then they're even color coded. That's how nerdy I am. And every set of tense is present tense and subjunctive. I hated that. She spent 2 weeks on subjunctive. It was horrible. And then Duolingo app. Y'all know what that is? It's fantastic. At first I was okay, alright. They said, okay, let's get to Duolingo app. Let's play some Spanish games. No, I don't want to do that. And then I became addicted to it. I'm so competitive. I'm I want to be level 12 or something. So, and then this is a great way to give an excuse teacher, I'm not on my phone because I'm on Facebook or anything. I'm on Duolingo. I just switch it really quick now. I'm learning Russian or something. And then I thought that the art show, Sigma Delta Pi did an art show last year, and I had made fun making the art, and through the process I learned more of the culture, a little bit of the literature, and also lastly, song. This one would be on Sam. You don't have to Spanish songs, Spanish songs, I guess. If you're like me and listen to Beyonce, just go on YouTube and type "Si yo fuera un chico" instead of "If I were a boy." So yeah, just listen to the Spanish. And in conclusion, as a non-native speaker, the best way to learn a language is to stick to it. Doesn't matter how crazy your teacher is, or how crazy it makes your day. I don't know. I took 5 AP classes last year, and Spanish took a lot of time, so it doesn't matter. Just keep doing it. And I even wanted to drop out of Spanish this year, but I was I'm in my 6th year. I should just keep going. And listen to your teachers because they'll help you to succeed. I didn't know she would inspire me. I want to be a language professor because of her. So yeah, teaching is not a career; it's a calling. So thank you, teachers. Yeah, thanks.
What a panel! This has been really, really great. Now we're going to give you some time to ask them some questions. So if you have some comments and things like that, all right? So this is your time. Comments, questions, any kind of contributions that you want to also add to this, okay?
Indonesia. 6th grade, which is 2009.
And you moved to Livingston?
Yes.
Why did you
Texas Tech University. My dad is doing his PhD right now.
Good, very good. I think probably the place to start would be Juan Muñoz's office. Dr. Juan Muñoz, who is the Senior Vice President for Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement. All right? He's fabulous. So, if it's not him, he will show you where to go. But this is Dr. Juan Muñoz, and he's in the administration building. All right? The west side of the administration building. Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Duolingo.
I've used that outside of Spanish classes. It is fun. If you feel like you can test out a part of it, you can, and it's really easy to use.
There's also Mango that you've already paid for.
Yeah.
It's I like it better than Rosetta Stone, and you already paid for it as a tech student if you go.
We have Spanish, and then German, French, and we are actually beginning on Mandarin Chinese.
No, you came the other way around, isn't it?
What did you do for you? Sorry? To learn Spanish?
Because he spoke Russian already, isn't it?
I was motivated. I wanted to absorb everything Spanish. So it was very easy for me. I was excited about language.
See, so talking about what Sebastian talked about, the motivation is really important, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned how, you've done research how speaking Spanish also helps you a lot in the workforce. But have you also, yourself personally gone out to work among Spanish speakers, or have you had a part-time job?
Legally, can't get one of those. So, I'm going to go with no. However, I have a couple of friends who have that experience. They do have the knowledge of how that helps them in the workforce. So that's also where that comes from.
Well, we have some teachers who were mentioned here, and I wanted to just point them out. Mindy, can you please stand up for a minute? Yes. They mentioned their teachers at Lubbock High, and this is one of them. Can you tell us a little bit about you and how you learned Spanish yourself?
Well, I'll try to keep it brief. I love this story because it's led to a family of Spanish speakers. My mother went to school, college, at age 33, with me and the baby on the hip. And she was going to WT for journalism. The journalism department did not fulfill her expectation, but she loved her Spanish teacher, her Spanish professor. She wound up being my Spanish teacher in high school, which some of you might go, woo! But it was an absolute delight for me, and I could get away with not necessarily being connected to her because we had different last names. She was remarried. And so that was sophomore and junior year in high school. I get into my freshman college classroom, and the teacher started speaking in Spanish. Deer in headlights. I'm terrified. Oh my gosh. I got to change my major. I can't make it in here. And as it turned out, it was okay, because I was not the only one. So survived through that. Freshman summer study abroad. Great. I mean, anybody who studied for any length of time in immersion, has it. And then my junior year, and then pretty much ever since then, multiple trips to Mexico and Spain. Has kept going. So my little sisters also ended up taking Spanish, studying abroad. The younger sister immediately underneath me is a Spanish teacher at Wiley in Abilene, and so we're quite a strange mixture of Anglo-speaking Spanish, and we'll be trotting along in English, switch into Spanish when it suits the term better, then back into English, back and forth we go. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for working with these young people, and then of course Ms. Key also, who was mentioned by the students. But we have seen some of your products here, and this is really, really good. And we hope that other teachers will also learn from you, and do the same. Yeah, yes.
Just for the people learning Spanish, one of the things that I found, the high school is great and everything, and they teach a lot, but you can't just learn through the school or even at Tech just through the classes. You have to do I had to do heavy supplementing on the side at home. And one of the easiest things was just finding articles on the internet and start reading them in Spanish. From reading the Wikipedia in English and then just going over to the side and clicking Espanol. And that was the easiest thing. And then there's sometimes that it's really fun because there are different opinions on things. And so one of my favorite examples, just real quick, is the Ants movie. And so in English, they do the cast, the plot, and everything. And then you click to Spanish, and then it does the same thing, plot, cast, everything. And then it also talks about all the social ramifications of the movie and what it's really talking about there. So there's differences, and it's a lot of fun.
Another good website that talks about current issues is Practica Español, and you can do Facebook or anything on that, and things will pop up. All, of course, your Spanish language magazines will help you for those outside things as well.
But it doesn't matter what you read.
No.
Like, you go read about the soccer game. Just spend, like, just read whatever it is.
Yeah. One of the things, building on what James said, is if you look at my phone right now, my settings are in Spanish.
Yeah.
Change your Facebook to
In
Spanish.
Spanish. I have 3 email addresses, and of the 3, 2 of them are in Spanish, my Gmail and my Yahoo. And so when I send emails to my friends or different persons, they're like, why is it para? But that's how I keep myself constantly. My homepage, my Google homepage is also in Spanish, because your mind makes a connection unconsciously, whether you pay attention or not. And so that's one of the ways I try to keep it current.
So you make it a part. So you make it a part of your daily life, isn't it? Okay, good. So now it's time to eat. We invite you to the reception. The reception is in 153, okay? Very good. Thank you all very much.
No.